Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I'm going to start a very small series where I'm going to teach you guys how to build a password manager using ReactJS for the front end, NodeJS and Express for the back end, and MySQL for the database. So I kind of lay out here how we're going to build the project. So we're going to be using Material UI for some stuff in the front end just to make it look a little bit better. And we're going to be using Node and Express as the API to create the API. And as I mentioned, we're going to be using MySQL to save the data. I'm going to be using MySQL Workbench to visualize the data. If you've never worked on it before, I'm going to show you exactly how to get it. And our project will basically be very simple. Our React will have a simple, like a form where you can add new passwords. And the idea of this project is basically you're going to store all the different passwords you have, like your Gmail password, your Facebook password, whatever, like all the different passwords you have. You want to keep them all in the same place. So you can add new passwords and give them like a title, so you know which, like for what website that password is. You can also delete old passwords. Maybe I'm going to add some update functionality to update new passwords, and also all the passwords will be encrypted. So that means that basically they won't be saved as the password. Like if I enter my password as, I don't know, password 123 in the database, it will obviously not be password 123 because for security reasons, we don't want someone to have access to our database and see all of our passwords. We want to basically use an encryption technology to be able to encrypt our passwords, and then we're going to use the same one to decrypt our passwords to be able to see them whenever we want to. So we're going to be using crypto for that, and that's basically it. This is a beginner application, and I will try to cover up as many topics as I can while building this. So that's basically it. So let's go into the project. I have VS Code opened here. I created a folder. The folder for now, it's just called Password Manager, and I opened it up in VS Code. If you don't know how to do that, just open up VS Code and click on Open and go to the folder where you created your project. And after inside of here, I'm going to create two folders. So you can do it like this, like new folder, and one is going to be for the client, and the other one is going to be for the server. So I accidentally created a file instead of a folder. So let's create a folder called server. Basically what this means is the client folder will be the React application, and the server folder will be the Node and Express application. So what I like to do is I like to divide my terminal into two. This one over here, I'll navigate towards the client folder, so CD, which is change directory to client, and now I'm inside of the client folder. And in this one, I'll go to the server folder, and basically I'll start installing my React application in my client by saying npx create React app, and then I put a dot to say that I want to create it inside of the client folder, and it will start installing React into this folder. And for our server, I'll start installing my Express and my Node server, right? So how do I do this? Well, I'm using yarn, so I'll say yarn init, but if you're using npm, just write npm init. Then a bunch of questions will appear. I'm going to press enter for all of them. They don't matter. And now it's done. You'll see that on our server folder now there is a package.json, which is perfect. And now the only thing we need to do here is install Express and MySQL and all the other dependencies that we might want to use in our application. Initially, I'll just install Express by writing yarn add express. Again, if you're using npm, it is npm install express. So yarn add express, and I also want to install MySQL because I'm going to be using MySQL as a database. So you can see it already installed. We can click on our package.json, and both Express and MySQL have been installed. And one thing that we also need to install is Course. Basically what Course does is it allows us to create a connection between our front-end server and our back-end server so that there's no issues when making those API calls. It is essential that you install Course when you're building an application such as this one, and we're going to be using basically just these three dependencies. And now that we've created that, we need to create the entry point to our server. You can see in our package.json, it says that the main file is index.js. You can change this to whatever you want. However, since ours is index.js and we want to keep that, we can just create a file called index.js. And this is where our server is going to start. I can see right now that our client has already been installed, but initially let's just start by building our server. So in order to start our server, we're going to basically just create a variable called express and set it equal to require express. So we're going to call the express module, and then we got to create our app which is going to be const app equals to express, and then what we've got to do is basically just come here at the bottom and say app.listen. And what this does is basically we can pass inside of this app.listen, first of all, the port. So our React application runs on a port called 3000. So we have to run this on a different port. What I like to do is I like to create here a variable called port and set it equal to a number that isn't 3000. So usually 3001. And this is going to be the port of our application. So I'm going to write here port, and then we got to pass a function, which basically is going to be called when our server has established a connection. And what I like to do is I like just to console.log some message saying something like server is running. So that's basically it. Now we can check to see if our server is actually running by coming here to our terminal and running node index.js. Make sure that you're running this on the server folder on the server terminal, and when you run this you'll see that the message server is running appears, meaning that the server is running. And we can look over here and go to our localhost 3001 on any browser, and if this message appears, it means it's working. It means that basically the API is working. We just didn't add any routes to it. So if we want to add a route, we can just come over here and say something like app.get, and we can like try to reach the initial route, which is this right here, because there's nothing we are adding here. It's just the initial route. If we want to add a message to really test to see if our API is working, we can basically say app.get, then pass a rec and a res, which basically means a request and a response, and we can pass a function inside of here which can send back just a message saying hello world. So we can test to see if this is working. Res.send literally just sends data, so whichever piece of data we put here, it's going to send as the response of the API call. So if we run here, we close this and we run node index.js, you can see that if we refresh this, it's going to say hello world. But you realize that every time you make a change in our server, currently we have to close our server by pressing Ctrl+C and running node index.js again. And that's something that I actually don't want to be doing all the time. I'm just going to clear my server here. So how do we actually fix this? So how do we make it so that whenever we save our server, we want to automatically restart our server? Well, we're going to add a package called node1. It's a very common package. It's basically just does exactly that. Whenever we refresh our server, it's supposed to basically, whenever we make any changes and save it, it's supposed to restart the server automatically for us. And to basically use node1, you have to come over here and you have to add a script. Very simple. We just add a script and a start script. So you can come over here and say start. And the start script will basically say something like node1 and index.js. If you write this, it basically means we want to run node1 on this file, and this is going to start the application. So when we save this, so if we come here to our server terminal and write yarn start, and what I mean by yarn start is we are running the start command, as you can see right here. If you're using npm, just run npm start. It's going to automatically know that it's trying to reach for node1, and if we press enter, it's going to run this right here, meaning that whenever we make any changes to our server, like changing this to hello w, and I save this, it's going to automatically restart the server and the changes appear here. So that's a small thing that will save us a lot of time, and it's mostly used for development purposes. So now that we set up this, let's start setting up our MySQL connection. So let's come over here. I'm going to be using, as I mentioned, MySQL Workbench. And if you haven't installed MySQL Workbench, I recommend installing it. I'll leave a link in the description. And what basically happens is when you come and open up your MySQL Workbench, you're going to see the local instance. You won't see all of this. And you can just click on it. Mine requires a password, but yours probably don't. And what happens is when you enter into this, you'll probably not see any of these databases that I have over here. You'll see nothing, and you'll have to create one. So I'm going to show you guys how to create one. I'm going to close all of this because I had it opened. So to create a new database in MySQL Workbench, you can just click on Create Schema, and you can give it a name. I'm going to name it Password Manager, as you can see right here. And I'm going to click on Apply, which basically just runs the SQL statement and creates this schema. So you can see that over here somewhere in our application, Let me take a look. Password manager, here it is. On yours, if it is your first one, it's going to be the first one. We can click on this and you'll see that there will be a tab for tables. So if we want to create a table in our database, we can just right click on this and click on create table. And basically we can give it a name. So the name I'm going to give to this table is going to be passwords. So I'm just going to call it passwords. I don't even want to write it capitalized. I'll just write it lowercase. And we gotta add some columns to this table. So it's really easy to add a column using MySQL Workbench. You just right click on this and you can give it a column. The first one we're gonna have is ID, and ID is auto increment, meaning that whenever it's a common column in every MySQL or SQL tables, basically just an ID to identify that. It's different for each element that you add, so every password will have a different ID. And we're gonna click on this to make it auto increment, so it automatically increases by 1 every time we add a new element. So the next thing we want is the password, so we want to keep track of the password, and we can make it be whatever we want. Let me increase this. This means that it can be like any type of character, which is great because it's exactly what we want, but let's increase the size to 255. So the number we put inside of here is just the amount of characters. So 255, I don't know how long the encrypted password will be. I'm just guessing. It's probably not going to be that long, but it doesn't really matter. You can put whatever you want inside of here, actually. So basically, what else do we want? We don't want it to be null. So NN basically means not null. And we want it to be, yeah, that's actually it. So we just want it to be not null. So basically that's it. And what else, what other column we might want to add? Basically, we also want to add the website, right? So, for example, we can have the name of the website. So, I don't know, website. So it might, like, it's probably not a website, but it's just like the place. I'm actually gonna call it title. So basically title is just a column representing which service we have that password for. So if it is Facebook, if it is our Facebook password, we'll put Facebook here. And again, we don't want it to be null. So for now, that's basically it. Let's apply. So we can click on apply and it will automatically create the SQL statement that is going to create the table. And when we click apply again, we can just, you'll see that it worked, and we can click on close and we can close our table. So you can see our table was created here. If I click on the passwords table, I can select rows and it will show out our table right here. Currently it doesn't have any elements. As you can see, there's only an ID, a password, and title, which is exactly what we wanted. By the way, I forgot to say that your MySQL Workbench might not be like in dark mode like mine. Apparently it's something to do with me having, like me using a MacBook. I think it's different for Windows. I don't know why, but don't worry about that. It's the same thing. So now what do we actually do? Well, we gotta come here and connect our Express server to this MySQL database that we just created, and also the table. So how do we do that? Well, to create a connection, we first need to call for the MySQL module. So we're gonna create a variable called MySQL and set it equal to require. So require MySQL. And with this, now we can just create a connection by coming over here and saying MySQL. Actually, we need to create a variable called DB. And what DB will basically represent is we're going to use this variable to make all the queries to our database. For example, if somewhere in our application we want to make a select statement or an insert statement to our database, we're going to use this variable right here. And we're going to set it equal to the connection to our database. So we can just say MySQL.create connection. And inside of here, we have to pass an object. And this object will always be the same. Basically, it will contain properties that define our connection to our database. And what are those properties? Well, it will always have a user. It will always have a host. Or, wait, what happened? So let me put this. Let me write, yeah, host. And it will always have a password. And finally, it will always have a database. So these are the 4 things that you need to put here. And I'll explain to you exactly what they mean. Well, user, usually when you create a new application, it's usually just root. So you can just put root. Like if it is your first time and you're running this, it's usually root. This is what it starts with. And host, since we're running this in our local host, I'm going to put localhost. Password, usually when it's your first time running a MySQL Workbench or working with MySQL, usually the password is just this right here. nothing, like just a string that has nothing inside of it. But I made my password equal to password, that's why it's password. But you can change yours in MySQL Workbench. It's really easy to do it. If you have any questions about this, I'll be answering every question in the description. And for database, we have to put the name of the database that we created. And what do I mean by the name? Well, this right here, I called it password manager. We have to put this so it knows that we're trying to reach for this database. So password manager. And this right here should have established the connection. So we're gonna be using this right here to be inserting data into our database. So now that we have created this, we basically established a connection to our database. We now have everything working. We have to basically start working with our front end. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start basically being able to reach and see our beautiful website and create like the form where we can add new passwords, and that's where we're gonna get started with. So basically, to get started with your React application, I'm going to close both of this, and let's open up our client folder right here. You can see that on our src there's a bunch of stuff. I usually delete some stuff, for example, that are not useful. For example, I delete the index.css, I delete the app.test, and I delete the logo. So those are the only ones I delete. So I can just click over here and delete. And actually I also delete setup tests, so let me delete this as well. And now you can see that it's finally deleted. So basically, after we did that, we need to basically delete all the imports all the parts in the application which imported stuff from those files that we deleted. We're gonna delete this call for the index.css over here, and we're gonna go here to the app.js, and we're gonna delete the part where it looks for the logo, and we're going to delete everything that already comes with React. Why do I do that? Well, because basically React, when you create React app, it creates an application with some stuff already, which we don't need. We want to start from scratch because those are like they're not useful for us. So that's why I'm deleting all that stuff. And now, if we want to see our application running, we can just run yarn start, and it's going to start a React application in our browser. I don't even need to go to the URL. It's going to open up automatically for me. And you'll see that initially there's not going to be anything, but if we add something here like, I don't know, hello world as well, and we save this, it will automatically show here somewhere hello world. Let me just open this up a bit and like push this a bit like this so you can see everything together, like this and over here. So you can see the hello world appears in our front end beautifully. So what do we actually want to do now? Well, in our app.js, as you can see right here, we want to start building our front end. So the first thing we actually need to do is we need to create a div that is going to represent kind of like the container of where we're going to have our like the part where we have the form for adding new passwords, right? So let's create a div here in our React application, and I'm gonna give it a class name of adding password. And yeah, let me just call it that. So inside of this div, what we're gonna have is we're gonna have an input of type text. So this will be a very simple input. As you can see when I refresh the page, this is an input. We're gonna give it a placeholder. So I'm gonna keep it just really simple with placeholder. It's gonna be equal to something like example password 123. So this is the input for the password. So you can see the placeholder appears, and I'm just gonna copy this and do the same thing for the other one, which is going to be the title. So like Facebook is the title for a password, right? So I might want to have a password for my Facebook account. So now that we created both inputs, let's create a button, and the button will say add password. Very simple button, as you can see right here. However, obviously this looks horrible, so what we have to do is we actually need to style it a bit. I don't want to really do a lot of styling, however, I really want to just like add some simple styling with CSS so that it doesn't look ugly. And I deleted all the CSS that already pre-existed here. The only thing I left was this right here, which is the first line in any CSS file, and I'm going to delete this as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a display flex, and I'm going to make it a flex direction of column, so that stuff are stacked on top of each other. And then I'm going to justify stuff to the center and align items to the center. What this does is it literally just centers stuff, and you can't see anything for now because we haven't started working with our add password div, right? So I think it's called add password. Let me take a look. It's adding password. That's a horrible name, but let's just leave it like this. So adding password, and the only thing it's gonna have is literally it's gonna have this as well. And now if we add this right here, all of this will be stacked on top of each other, as you can see right now. Yeah. So what else do we want to add? Basically, we want to give it a background color, and I'm gonna give it a background color of light blue because I like this color, light blue. And for now you can't see anything, but you'll see what I mean when I give it a width of like 60% and a height of like, I don't know, 300 pixels, something like this. Yeah, that looks good. And I also want to give it a border radius of like 20 pixels, so it's kind of nice. Yeah, that's okay. And I want to margin this a bit, so let me just write margin top of, no, actually not margin top here. Yeah, actually that's fine. Margin top of like, I don't know, 20 pixels, so it's kind of like pushed from the top, as you can see. And then what do we need to do now? Well, we just need to access the inputs inside of here and also the buttons. So we want to style the buttons and inputs. So I'll just say button and input. And literally the only styling that I want to do with the input and the button is I want to give it a width of like 300 pixels. Some height. So like I like giving it 40 pixels for height. I also like removing the border. Border equals none. I like giving it a border radius of like 7 pixels or maybe 8. Let me give it 7 pixels. And you'll see that now they all change, obviously. I'll give it a margin of like 15 pixels. And they'll kind of like space out. Let's decrease this margin to 10. Let's give it some padding left so that this text right here, it doesn't start immediately from the sides. Let's give it 15 pixel. And we'll start coming from the right. And then let's just increase the font size by like font size to like, I don't know, 17 pixels. Okay, that should be fine. You can see the font size inside of it increases, and now it looks like pretty nice, right? In my opinion, it looks great. I also want to access any button and just give it a cursor of pointer so that whenever we hover any button in our application, there's a little pointer when you pass over it, and that's fine. So now this is literally all the styling we want, and let's start working with our front end and thinking about how are we going to send like the data that we wrote here to our backend. So basically the way we're going to do this is by using states in React. So if you've never worked with states before, states are just variables that you're able to trigger re-renders in your page whenever you change those values, and it's great for any kind of React application. So to import state, you gotta say import useState from React, and now you're able to use the useState hook. And over here we can create two states. One of them is going to represent the value that we get from the password, and the other one is going to be representing the value that we get from the title. So let's say to create a state for the password, let's say password and set password. Set password would be like the variable representing the value for the password, and set password would be a function that we can use to change the password. So it's going to be a string. That's why we say use state and we pass an empty string. I'm assuming you guys already know, like, are familiar with states, because this is more of like a beginner to intermediate project, because if you're trying to build a full stack application, I recommend knowing at least the basics of either the front end or the back end. So let's also create the title. So the title state and set title. And it's also going to be a string. So now that we have both of these states, what we can do is we can basically set so that whenever we're writing something in the input, it will basically change the value for those states, right? So whenever I write something in the password input, I want to change the value for password. So how do we do that? Well, we can very easily come here and say onChange. So give this an onChange property. And this, whatever function we put inside of here, will be called every time there's a change in the input, which means every time someone writes something in the input. And we can grab the event for each input. And now we can just say set password equal to event.target.value. And what that means is basically for every time something changes here, so if I press A, now password will be set to the value in the input. So event.target.value just grabs whatever is written inside of the input, which currently is just A. But if I press D, then the function changes is called again with the new value, because onChange is called every time there's a change to the input, right? So that's the basic idea. And we can just copy this and paste it over here and just change this to set title, because we want to change for the title. And now we have access to whatever we're writing in our inputs. That's the easiest way of doing this, in my opinion. And this is great because now we have the variables that we want to send to our database. So now that we have that, we are now able to insert stuff into our database, right? We just need to find a way in our backend to create an endpoint or a route that is going to be accessible and allow us to insert that data. So how do we do that? Well, let's open up here our application and go to our index.js. And over here, let's create our first route. So it's going to be a very simple route. It's going to be a post route because we're going to insert stuff into the database. And let's call it add password, something like this. So add password. And this is going to be for now. For now, let's just test to see how do we add a password, like how do we send and insert a data into the database. So how do we do that? Well, we can easily just come here and say, first of all, we have to grab the data. We have to grab some data from the front end, right? So how do we access the values that we're writing here in this input? So how do we actually access password and title that exists in the front end in our backend? Well, when we make our request from the front end to the backend, so when we make that request, we can actually send an object called body, and that object we can pass values. So for example, we can pass a value for the password and the title, and every request you can pass a body. So that's how we actually pass variables from the front end to the backend in an API request. So what that means is basically every time you want to access the body from a request, you can say rec.body, and always this will be equal to the object that you passed when you make that request. We currently haven't made the request yet, but when we're going to definitely add an object, which is going to be the body, containing a property for value and the value for a property for password and the value for password, and a property for title and the value for title, which means that for now, let's just assume that we're going to do that when we make the request. So when we make the request, we can access both password and title, and we can do it very simply by doing like this. We can access rec.body, open and close curly braces, and just structure the properties that we have inside of here. We're going to have a property for password and a property for title. And now these are two variables. Password is containing the value for the password that we inserted here, and title is containing the value for the title that we inserted here, and we have full access to them. So now that we have the two variables, let's make the SQL insert statement into our database. So how do we do this? Well, we can very easily do this by writing db, which is the db variable that we created here. And we can say db.query. And here we can pass any SQL query we want to. For example, we can say insert into, which is a type of SQL query, and we can write the name of the table. In our case, the name of the table is passwords. So we can say we want to insert into passwords. And then what we have to pass is basically here the columns that we want to insert, and then say values and the values that we want to insert. So this is basically the template for an SQL statement, an insert statement in SQL. Basically the columns that we want to insert is password and title. So we want to insert values for password and title. So we can just write here password and title. And in the order that we wrote here, so first password and then title, we can pass here the values for password and title. And you might be wondering, well, but password and title are variables, and this is a string. How do I can't just write password here, right? So how do I actually put those variables here? Well, the safest way of doing this is you can just temporarily put two question marks here. So we want to insert two variables, so password and title. So we can put two question marks, and right next to the query, you can put a comma here and pass an array containing the variables that you want to insert in order. So we want to insert password first for the question mark and title next. So we just write here password and title. And now this question marks in the statement will be replaced by password first and then title. And finally, we put a comma here after the array, and we can grab two values from this query. The first one is any errors that occur, and the other one is the result of this query. And result, basically, for example, if you're making a select statement, you want to get data, the data will be here. This is just it will just say stuff like what kind of like messages from the request you made, that kind of stuff. And if you have any errors, here this variable will represent the error. So we can say if error, we want to, for now, just console.log error. So we're just asking, well, if there's any error, we want to console log it. And if not, so else, we can just say res.send success. So now what this means is basically we're going to make the query. If there's any errors, we're going to console log the errors. If there isn't any error for now, we're just going to respond, like send a response for this post request saying success. And if we actually get, if we were successful in this insert, we're going to see as the response the word success. So basically, this is it for making this request. Now, if we want to access and make an API call to this, we need to come here to our frontend, and we need to install a package in our frontend called Axios. So Axios, if you've never worked with it before, it's a very famous, like extremely famous package. I'm going to open up a new terminal here, and I'm going to navigate towards my client folder, so client. And now that I'm inside of my client folder, I basically just want to install Axios. So I'm going to say yarn add Axios. If you're using npm, just write npm install Axios. So Axios is a library, very simple library, where you can make API requests to any API. And you can use fetch, which is a function in JavaScript, which is like built in. However, Axios just make it so much simpler. I'll show you guys. To make an API request with Axios, you can write import Axios from Axios. And over here, we can, for example, we need to make this API request whenever we click on the add password button, right? So what we can do is we can come to this button, give it an on-click event, and say that whenever we click on this button, we want to call a function, right? So let's create that function right now. Const add password, and it's going to be a very simple function, which is just going to make the API request. However, we can need to pass the name of the function to the on-click so that it knows that whenever we click on this button, we want to call that function. And in the function, the only thing it's going to do is it's going to call for Axios and make a post request to an API endpoint or an API URL. So you might be asking, wait, what is the URL for the API? Well, it's exactly the one that we reached earlier. It's localhost 3001. It's where our server is running. So I can say localhost 3001 / add password, which is the route that we wrote over here. As you can see right here, we said we want to reach the route add password, and we're going to make a post request to this route right here. And then what we can do is we can pass an object, and this object right here is going to be the body object that I mentioned earlier. So body is represented by this object right here, which means that we need to pass a password and a title to this object. Very easily, we can just say password equals to password, so the variable password, the state password that we have, and title equal to title, which means that we are now passing an object containing two fields, password and title, and both of them are equal to the value that we want, so the values that we're getting from the input. And here in the backend, we can access password and title by just destructuring this way, as you can see. So this is how we pass values from the front end to the backend. So after this, what we can do is, for now, let's just test to see if this is actually working. Let's refresh this, let's refresh our server, and let's come over here. Let's try to add something, right? You can see that in our database, there is nothing. So you can see right here, there's absolutely nothing. And if I come over here and I say, I want to add a password, let me see what password I want to add. Password 123. And it's apparently my Instagram password. So I want to click on add password, and I want to see the console log to see if everything is working. Let me click on add password, and you'll see that it won't work. And before I click this button, I realized why it wouldn't work, and I'll show you guys why it wouldn't work. Two things is causing this error. One of them is that we didn't use course, and the other one is we didn't tell our backend to parse JSON objects received from the frontend. And I know that might seem confusing. However, the fix for this is extremely easy. It's just 2 lines of code. The first line of code is we need to import course from course. So require course And over here, we just have to write two lines of code. The first one is app.use course, to means that which basically allows us to make connections between two servers in our same computer, so our frontend and our backend. And the other one is to parse the JSON, which is just app.use express.json. Literally just this, meaning that we're able to receive JSON on our backend. And you can see that we still don't have data. So if I click on this again, let's see if anything was console logged, if there was any errors. You can see this error was from before, and in our database, if I refresh it, the data appears over here, as you can see. So that means it's working. We're sending the data from our React app to our backend. If I want to add another password, like this is not my password, let's imagine that's a password, and I want to say that that's my GitHub password, which is not in reality, and I click on this again, you'll see that the new data appears here perfectly, right? So obviously for now, the password isn't hashed. It isn't, not hashed, it's not encrypted, but we're going to be doing everything in the next video. I don't want to make this video super long, but I'm planning on making this series not that long, like 2 videos, maybe 3 videos long. However, I really wanted to make this series because I think it will teach a lot, especially about beginner stages of building an API together with a React app, but also about some interesting stuff like encryption and being able to manage a full stack project more efficiently. So that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you guys want to see in this series. If you guys want me to make this a little bit bigger and add more stuff, let me know. If you want me to just make this like 2 videos long, let me know. Also comment if you guys have any questions, if you guys have any errors. If you look at my channel, I answer every single comment. So I would really, like, I'll be totally open to answer you guys. And yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe because I'm posting every single day. And I see you guys next time.